They leave parties early. They cancel plans and feel relieved instead of guilty. They can spend an entire weekend alone and call it a good weekend. Society has a whole vocabulary for these people: antisocial, loner, weird. But psychology says something very different is going on. Some of the strongest, most creative, most self-possessed minds in history belong to people who chose their own company. Today, what science actually knows about people who prefer being alone, the biology behind it, the hidden advantages, the real dangers, and how to tell which side of the line you're on. First, we need to fix a confusion the entire culture keeps making. Loneliness and solitude look identical from the outside: one person, alone in a room. But inside the nervous system, they are opposites. Loneliness is unwanted isolation. You crave connection and can't get it. Solitude is chosen separation. You could be with people, and you selected your own company instead. The research is brutal about the first one. Julianne Holt-Lundstad's meta-analyses found chronic loneliness associated with health risks comparable to smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day. Elevated stress hormones, worse sleep, higher cardiovascular risk. Loneliness is a genuine emergency, and nothing in this video romanticizes it. But chosen solitude shows a completely different profile. Studies find people high in what researchers call preference for solitude or dispositional autonomy show lower stress reactivity, better emotional regulation, and higher life satisfaction when the aloneness is voluntary. Same empty room. Opposite biochemistry. The variable isn't the aloneness, it's the choosing. So the first diagnostic question is never, how much time do you spend alone? It's, who decided? If you did and it feeds you, that's solitude. If life did and it starves you, that's loneliness. Everything else in this video is about the first kind. So why do some people consistently choose it? Here's the biology. Psychologist Hans Eysenck proposed, and later brain research substantially supported, that introverts operate at a higher baseline of cortical arousal. In plain language, their brains are already busy at rest. Hans Eysenck's framework, refined by decades of work since, suggests a crowded room, 3 conversations, background music, and small talk for a low-arousal brain. That's fuel. For a high-arousal brain, it's overflow. There's supporting evidence at the level of neurochemistry too, work popularized by researchers like Marty Olson. Laney points to introverts favoring the acetylcholine pathway. The calm, inward, long thought circuit over the dopamine-hungry stimulation loop extroverts ride. What does this mean practically? It means an introvert isn't rejecting you when they leave the party at 9. They're regulating. Think of a volume knob that starts the day at 7. The world doesn't need to add much before everything clips into distortion. This also solves the classic mystery of the person who is brilliant and warm one-on-one but silent in a group of 10. It was never shyness. Shyness is fear of judgment. This is bandwidth. 1 channel of deep conversation fits inside their processing budget. 6 channels of small talk blow past it, and the system responds the only way it can. It withdraws to protect the signal. Now the interesting part, what actually happens in a brain that's alone and undisturbed. Neuroscience calls it the default mode network, the set of brain regions that switches on precisely when nothing external demands your attention. Marcus Rachel, who identified it, showed the brain doesn't idle when you do it changes jobs. The default mode network handles memory consolidation, self-reflection, imagining futures, and critically connecting distant ideas. This is the machinery behind why your best ideas arrive in the shower, on the walk, at 2 a.m., and essentially never in meetings. Constant social contact keeps the brain in performance mode, monitoring faces, managing impressions, predicting responses. Rich processing, but it crowds out the network that does the deep filing. Solitude is when the mind finally gets to process its own backlog, and occasionally, in the middle of the filing, it finds something extraordinary. Creativity research bears this out. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi noted that creative adolescents tolerated, even sought, more alone time than their peers, and studies on incubation show that stepping away from a problem measurably improves solution rates. The people who prefer being alone aren't opting out of thinking. They're opting into the kind of thinking that can't happen in company. If solitude were a defect, history would look very different. Isaac Newton's most explosive period, the foundations of calculus, optics, gravitation, came during 2 plague years spent largely alone at Woolsthorpe. Charles Darwin structured his entire life at Down House around protected thinking time, famously walking his thinking path alone every day. Marcel Proust wrote from a cork-lined room. Emily Dickinson built one of the great bodies of poetry from a bedroom in Amherst. Beethoven, Kafka, Chopin. The pattern repeats so often that psychiatrist Anthony Storr wrote a classic book about it. Solitude, a return to the self, arguing that for a certain kind of mind, deep work is a relationship in itself, as nourishing as any human bond. Even in modern research on elite performance, Anders Ericsson's studies of expert musicians found the most important practice. Deliberate practice was overwhelmingly done alone. Now, an honest caveat, none of these people were hermits in the cartoon sense. Newton corresponded constantly. Darwin ran one of the great scientific letter networks of his century. The pattern isn't 0 people. It's a deliberate architecture, long protected stretches of solitude, punctuated by chosen high-quality connection. Which, notice, is exactly the architecture the person who leaves your party early is instinctively trying to build. But let's be honest, because this video isn't here to flatter anyone. There is a threshold where solitude stops being strength, and you need to know where it is. The test is 2 questions. Question 1, is your alone time a choice or a fear? Real solitude says I could join them, and tonight I'd rather not. Hiding says I can't face them. If being around people triggers dread rather than mere fatigue, if you're avoiding rejection, judgment, or conflict, rather than seeking quiet, that's not preference, that's avoidance, and avoidance grows by being fed. Clinically, that pattern has names social anxiety, avoidant coping, and it responds well to help, which is worth seeking, because it tends to shrink your life one canceled plan at a time. Question 2, does your alone time restore you or numb you? Restorative solitude has output you think, create, rest, walk, and you return to people fuller, with something to give. Numbing solitude has only input hours dissolved into scrolling and streaming, and the silence afterward feels less like peace and more like static. Same closed door, opposite outcomes. And one more honest marker, real solitude preserves your warmth. If you notice your empathy corroding, people starting to feel like an annoyance category, rather than individuals that's isolation curdling, and it's the signal to reach out even though you don't feel like it. The muscle of connection atrophies quietly. So how do you build a life around this trait instead of apologizing for it? Rule 1, schedule solitude like it's a meeting, because for your brain, it is. Unscheduled alone time gets cannibalized by obligations, and then you wonder why you're irritable by Thursday. Protect the recharge blocks the way an athlete protects sleep. Rule 2, budget your social energy deliberately. If a party costs you 3 units, and dinner with one close friend costs 1 spend, like it. Choose fewer, deeper engagements where your one-channel depth is an advantage, and stop paying premium prices for gatherings that return nothing. Rule 3, communicate the trait so it stops reading as rejection. 1 sentence to the people you love, I need quiet time to recharge, it's about my battery, not about you, prevents years of quiet misunderstanding. Rule 4, keep the inner circle warm. The research consensus is that well-being doesn't require a big network, but it does require a few genuinely close bonds, even for the most solitary temperaments. Maintain your 2 or 3 people with real rhythm, the check-in message, the monthly dinner. And Rule 5, put the solitude to work. Aim it at something, the craft, the writing, the problem, the walk with no phone. Solitude with a direction becomes depth. Solitude without one can drift into the numbness we talked about. You weren't built broken. You were built for signal over noise, so build a life that honors the wiring. Last piece, and it's the one that causes the most damage when it's missing. The people who love you need a translation. Because here's what your solitude looks like from the outside. You left early, you didn't reply for 2 days, you said no to the thing they were excited about. They don't see a battery. They see a verdict on them. And in the absence of an explanation, people always write the most personal one available. So give them the sentence. Not an apology, not a defense, a description. I recharge alone. It's not about you, and it doesn't mean I'm upset. If I go quiet, I'm refueling and I'll be back. Say it once, early, when nothing is wrong, because said during a conflict, it sounds like an excuse, and said in advance, it sounds like a manual. Then, and this is the part people skip, back it up with a pattern. If you cancel, propose the next time in the same message. If you go quiet for 3 days, send the meme on day 4. The proof isn't in the explanation, it's in the return. Solitary people lose relationships not because they withdraw, but because they withdraw. Without a visible orbit, and an orbit that always comes back, is not abandonment. It's rhythm. And for the people on the other side of this, watching someone you love disappear into their quiet. Understand that being left alone is, from them, a form of trust. They're not shutting a door on you. They're showing you the room they actually live in and assuming you won't take it personally. That assumption is the compliment. It's just a very quiet one. Choosing your own company was never the flaw. Done right, it might be the quietest form of strength there is. If you're one of these people, this channel was built in a quiet room too. Subscribe and I'll see you in the next one.